So I watched this Abbas Kiarostami film yesterday called The Traveler. It's one of my favorite. It's by one of my favorite directors of world cinema. He died recently, but his movies move me all the time whenever I think about them. And it's a film about a child trying to go to Tehran to watch a soccer game, and that's the entirety of the movie. He tries to make money to get there, and he tries to when he's there he tries to find the stadium and he tries to buy tickets in a very Iranian sense of these kind of 70s movies. It's very simple. Like Kiarostami's movies are very simple. What is one of his most popular movies, for example, is Where's the Friend's Home, and the entirety of the film is about a child trying to return his friend's homework during the night, and with him kind of sneaking around in the nighttime, trying to get to his friend's house, asking around, and that's kind of the whole movie. And this one is also very similar, where it's very single-minded, very straightforward. He wants to get to do the game, start, and he has to get there, and that's the what the movie's about. And it's very it's interesting because it seems so simple, but it has a lot of dramatic weight to it when you think about it. Because what happens throughout the course of the film is that the boy ends up doing whatever it takes to get to where he wants to go, and in that process of doing whatever it takes to get where he wants to go, he does things that are quite morally questionable, and not that he was already kind of a morally upstanding child, but he does things that were kind of that are morally questionable in order to kind of get to his goal, and it ends with him. Well, towards the end of the film, he has a nightmare where he receives all the repercussions of all the bad things that he did to get to get to Tehran, to get the money to get there. He has a nightmare where he essentially gets punishment for all the things that he did to get to this place. And at the end of the film, he doesn't even get to what he wants to do. He wants to watch a soccer game, and he actually oversleeps somewhere nearby. He never gets to watch his game, but he works so hard to get there, and he doesn't. And through any he gets, he uses kind of morally questionable means to get there, and at the end he doesn't get what he wants, and he still has to kind of pay. Eventually, have to pay the brunt of the force of the community that he scammed to get to that point. And again, this is a perspective of a 10-year-old child or something, and it doesn't necessarily have to be just about the child. It's really mostly about, I think, in general, about how we are, and maybe there's a sense in which sometimes we really want to do whatever it takes to get what we want, and maybe there's a sort of karmic retribution, but I don't know. It's this just a sense that doing bad things to get what you want maybe doesn't always turn out well. I think that's a very shallow way of looking at it, but that's the most direct way of looking at it, where it's a sense again where if you do bad things to get what you want, you won't be it'll not work well for you. But on the other hand, it's also just it's like looking at this child who is just so clearly unloved and not really cared for, and we always have these ideas because the protagonist is the child. We have this sense maybe it's the society, it's the society's fault perhaps that has brought up a child that would do whatever it takes to get what he wants. And it's interesting. It's hard to tell because with these in the Iranian films, especially with the Kiarostami films, they always feel very vaguely. They always feel very simple, but they seem to invite you to extrapolate political political in the political sphere of things, of how to kind of interpret them. Uh, where it seems very clear to me, at least in my way of looking at the film, it seems to show what happens when a child doesn't get enough maybe nourishment from those who are supposed to help him flourish. He will just not turn out like a decent human being. Because he would realize to some degree that in order to actually get what he wants, no one else is going to try to help him, and which is not necessarily true in most cases, because in most cases you have a unit of sorts, a support unit, a family unit friend unit or whatever. So there are people who are supposed to surround you that will support you to where you want to go, and give you that kind of moral support, that kind of just anything. But this kid doesn't have anyone in his life, and it forces him to work on his own. And oftentimes it seems that to get what you want on your own, you have to cut corners, and you have to devolve into this sense of doing kind of bad things, kind of shitty things to other people. And that's kind of what ends up happening with this film. And it's one of these things again where it's hard to tell, like, how to look at the movie, where to. Once the movie ends, right, you have the sense where this kid, he walks up into a stadium and it's empty, and he misses the whole game that he spent so much kind of energy to get to. And it's fun to always put yourself in a position like, well, if you're that kid, what would you do now? Do you go home? Do you have any home to go back to? What happens now? You're in the middle of Tehran, you're a child, and you're all alone, and you may not even want to go home. And in my head, I think, well, that seems to sound like you're going to end up going to kind of ending. That doesn't sound like a good situation to be in, and it may not really end up very well for that child, because it doesn't seem like he has anywhere to go or anywhere he wants to go. He doesn't care about school, doesn't care about his family, he doesn't care about his friends, really. And if he goes back, he'll just be, punished to the degree that he would be. So I think for him, he'd probably stay there, but that doesn't sound like a good idea, to be alone as a child in a big city. So anyway, I realize this isn't not really, I review or whatever, but I just think it's, it makes you think about the systems in which we have to support the young, and how easily it can, and maybe not, it's not even a support system, not even a direct support system. It may be that Kiarostami is referring to the entirety of that society. If its society brings up children, it's the village that raises a child. It's the country, it's the norms, it's what socially we are expected to kind of project or play into, and all that stuff. And instead of over analyzing it, maybe it's just about this story, but it's definitely very moving, and I highly recommend watching it. Even though I've kind of spoiled, or even though I kind of laid out the plot, it's worth seeing the film just for the experience of seeing the child's face throughout. I think it's that thing with it's that philosophical idea where if you know everything about something, will you still gain something from the experience of experiencing it? Which I'm not sure if that made sense from my explanation, but it's like this idea of a person who is colorblind, and then they know everything about color, and then what happens if they they know everything about color, absolutely everything you can know about color. They've read in this book, and if they actually if one day they cure their color blindness, will they gain anything new from looking at blue or whatever? And again, that's the same thing with films. I feel like even if you know what the movie's about, you gain so much more from just seeing how things are framed, how seeing things are shot, seeing the performances. You gain so much more than just knowing what the, like, in my experience of things, the plot of a film is almost not that important really in terms of your experience. Your experience is the actual visual and audio presentation of the piece of art, as opposed to merely the more the higher level orders of plot. So yeah, anyway, that's what I think about this movie. I highly recommend watching it, and watch all of the Kiarostami movies. He's a master, I think.